Welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, we got a packed house today. We got 8 of us here, magical number. First off, we'll start off with Lisa, the Occult Reject mad scientist. What is going on, Lisa? How are you? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to hear all the discussions that are brewing already. And so anyway, I wanted to plug at the beginning, occultresearchinstitute.org. Check us out.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate you joining us. And Frater Jin the Ninja, what is going on, sir?
Hello, Cardinal. Good evening. Okay, so I'm Jin Ninja. You can find me on X Twitter at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn. The show account is at Threshold Saints on both IG and Twitter. My show is Serial Experiments in Speculative Ontology. We just launched a new series on the Grey Lodge entitled Welcome to Hapaborea. So speculative American Gnosticism. So if you're interested, check it out.
Awesome. Thank you very much, sir. And Ricardo, what is going on, Ricardo? Please let everybody know what your deal is and where they can find all your amazing research.
Oh, thank you. So my name is Ricardo Calvario, and you can find me at Ricardo Calvary 1 at X or History, Myths, and Legends on YouTube. But I would recommend, not myself, but for instance, the Institute for Natural Philosophy that I'm part on. You can go to institutefornaturalphilosophy.org and find our magazine Pharaohs, that it's free to download or to watch directly. And if anyone wants to participate, they have the contacts there to reach us. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ricardo. And Heidi Love. What is up, Heidi? Please let everybody know they can find you.
Thank you, Cardinal. I'm so happy to be here because, the Pope was elected today and the Cardinal's here with us and freighters, and we have all these people. Now, I'm Heidi Love of the Unfiltered Rise. I'm everywhere podcasts are served. You can find me mostly on Spotify. If you do YouTube, it's just one show a week because they hate me. So check it out there.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Heidi. Always appreciate you coming on the show. And Ethan Indigo, my man. How's it going?
Peace. Glad to be here. Honored to hear you guys speak. Joey, love your ideas. I have a couple articles on the Occult Research Institute, and I'm easy to find on social media. So honored to be here, you guys.
Definitely go check out his stuff. I got his links in the bottom as well. And last but not least, not last but not least, Headless made it. JJ Vance, real quick, let everybody know what your deal is as well, so everybody can find your amazing work in your podcast.
Nick, as always, I appreciate the invite, sir. Fellow Occult Rejects folks, I always am looking forward to the conversation. We just got one more here with Headless. Joey, great to meet you. JJ Vance, host of Operation GCD, more notably, not the vice president. It's important to note that. Grok AI even thinks I'm the vice president. And I think that's JD Vance hosts the Operation GCD podcast. I have to tell Grok that's mistaken, but I also have an alibi for the death of the Pope because he's often blamed here for that. So, well, yeah, looking forward to the conversation. What's that?
Me and you were podcasting when it happened.
Right, exactly. I've got an alibi. Now, looking forward to the convo, though. Definitely great to meet you there, Joey.
Thank you.
Awesome. And now, finally, last but not least, Headless Giant. Please let everybody know what it is.
How you doing? Yeah, I'm the Headless Giant. You can find my show on YouTube. I'm also on X. Just look up the Headless Giant. And if you have any occult / scary / creepy stories you want to tell me, just send it to the Headless Giant podcast at gmail.com, and we will get those up there for you.
Awesome. Definitely. Go hit them up with some emails. And now, finally, to the guest, Joey P. is back on again from the Library of Untold. Please, man, let everybody know where they can find all your amazing work.
Well, I host Library of the Untold and write it and whatever else, but something that's new that was not last time, and actually this is the first time I've said this, so a little announcement for your show here. Fucking finally, we have libraryoftheuntold.com where just everything is now in one place. So I've been needing that for some time because in the comments, people are always like, hey man, where can I find your old videos all in one place or your music? It's boop, right there. But the bookstore doesn't work yet. Don't buy a book. It won't work. So we're getting there. Other stuff is available though.
Thanks for the honesty.
Yeah.
No, but good for you, man. That is great. That is great. Listen, we had a great time the last time you were on, man. I am so stoked that you decided to come on the show too, to even cover a topic that I don't think you've really covered on your show. So
No,
man, this is, it was an honor. I was like, damn, he's asking me to come on my show to cover something. That's what's up. Thank you. So please, Joey, let us know what's been going on through your head for a while.
so for like years now, obviously, I've been just curious about the pyramids, just like anybody else, but along with ancient sites and everything else. And I was aware of the power plant theory, and I wasn't quite fascinated by it because it seemed like one of those fringe subjects that you would, get to eventually. But whenever they kind of did that, maybe bunk, maybe not study with Khafre, the SAR thing or whatever, that piqued my interest a little bit, and it kind of went nowhere. But while it was piquing my interest, I started getting into Chris Dunn and many other just the no-nonsense engineers who are miles from anything esoteric, who look at the pyramids and cross sections of it, and they're like, that's a machine. And knowing that I'm not qualified as a machinist to argue with any of these guys, I started reading. And usually I use these books for reference, dude, but these two books in particular caught me, and I just was cover to cover with them in like 2 weeks. I couldn't put them down. And that became what's going to be, I guess, about the next 3 episodes on the show starting tomorrow. Nice. So the way that these 3 episodes the way they start is the first one's just going to be no nonsense, just cold, hard facts about the pyramids. Before anything speculative comes out, I want to lay down a foundation of what is absolutely determinable. And what that part is, I think, is obvious that they weren't tombs, first of all. I think that's out the window. And now that that's out the window, it's still taboo to speculate anything else, which is really weird because we have a gap to fill. And with that gap, this power plant hypothesis just knocks it out of the park. All of the parts fit. And what's strangest about it is there's no parts of the pyramid that seem like they don't adhere to a power plant type of hypothesis. That's not to say that they used a power plant the way that we do today. That might have been the case, but their usage of electromagnetic energy might be so alien to us that we don't know what they used it for. All we know is that the pyramid, these 3 pyramids in a row themselves, are set up to be able to harness electromagnetic power. And what they did with it, we don't know. But it's absolutely fascinating. So after reading these books, I wanted to make a video that was just a straight rundown of what the pyramid did from A to Z in order of energy from the earth to exporting energy, just like a power plant does today, but without any of the fluff. Because man, these books, I love these guys. They tell their story and they inch around, it'll always be like, I was on site here and there and the sunset, whatever, and I got this feeling or whatever. And that's great. I love those. But I don't want it on the show. So I just wanted to make a show that it was just straight A to Z, what the pyramid did and how. And that's what I'd like to present to you today.
Oh, yeah.
So do you happen to have a cross section of the pyramid?
I have to go through the pictures here real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Something like
that. All of these pictures a month ago would not have haunted me, but now it's like it's a whole crazy thing. There's a good one right there. All right, so everyone kind of knows that the pyramid is a map of the earth, so to speak. The dimensions of the pyramid, when multiplied by 4,432, is the dimensions of the earth itself. So people used to think that this was to be a message to future generations, that they knew the circumference of the Earth. Chris Dunn had a different idea. In his profession as an aerospace engineer, he uses what are called coupled oscillators, something that is the same dimensions of something else, but are a different octave, will vibrate when the other thing vibrates. For example, two tuning forks. You know how one will ring and then the other one will ring without touching it, right? That's a loose form of a coupled oscillator. That works with octaves as well. Like on a piano, if you hit one key, the other octaves would start vibrating as well if there weren't dampeners in the piano. However, the other strings won't. So the pyramid itself, the whole shape is a coupled oscillator with the Earth, according to Chris Dunn. Down in the very bottom shaft down here would have been some kind of device that inspired Nikola Tesla to create what he called an earthquake machine. It would basically start the engine. It would vibrate or pulse in such a way that would get the pyramid rumbling with the Earth. So it's important to distinctify that the Earth is always vibrating. That's a perpetual, as long as the moon is doing its thing, the Earth is going to be fully perpetual energy. So this whole chamber right here on the right, this entire that large guy right there is the Grand Gallery. And that was filled. Now, if we have a picture of the Grand Gallery, it's black and white. It's one of those little diagram picture looking things. And
but you know what?
almost.
Let me go back.
Oh, am I backwards? Yeah.
Is this it?
No, that's the King's Chamber. But we're getting there. That's where the big shit happens right there. Right there. So that's the Grand Gallery right there. There's several of these slots, these notches going down the gallery that held some kind of components that were a mystery even to, well, I say even Egyptologists. They didn't know. But it was predicted by these engineers, including Chris Dunn, that would have been filled with Helmholtz resonators that are obviously gone now, either stolen by grave robbers or, tucked behind closed doors by Egyptologists themselves. But a Helmholtz resonator is similar to how you blow wind into a bottle and it makes a pitch. Same thing as a wine glass. If you were to lick your finger and go around the outside, which I think Headless will be able to do here any moment now. I'm almost positive of it, but maybe.
It's only Cherry RC. I can't use the wine effect.
Well, so the Grand Gallery functions as an acoustic amplifier, basically, where any pitch going in is going to be amplified going into the King's Chamber. So we didn't really know what the Helmholtz resonators look like until we realized they were under our noses the entire time. There's things like the schist disc and these units of pottery that are absolutely built perfectly and laser scanned that would have worked as mechanisms inside of these individual slots and shafts. Slots and shafts that, by the way, would not function for a tomb in any way, shape, or form, any more than any of the rest of this would. The bottom here is the reason this is connected to the Grand Gallery is because this is the Queen's Chamber down here. And the Queen's Chamber was filled with liquid hydrogen. And that's not speculation. That is taking salt, scraping it off the wall and testing it in a lab and saying that is absolutely hydrogen. It was filled with hydrogen fuel, just like we use today in batteries, backup generators. I mean, you name it. So another thing that, by the way, does not function in any way, shape, or form for a tomb. If you ask an Egyptologist why the chamber is filled with hydrogen, they'll say it's because that's where people urinated over the years when they visit. Some of these things that I'll say, they don't make any sense, and they're almost an insult to the listener. How crazy it is that some of these explanations from the Egyptologists. In fact, if we could get a picture of the Queen's chamber, and sorry, we have to kind of go into random mode to get to it, but inside the Queen's chamber, there's two shafts. Well, actually, you can see it on this picture right here. And one was a kind of acid solution, and the other one was, I'm going to forget the chemical name, but there was two chemicals that came into the Queen's chamber, which is very interesting because I love saying that the Queen's chamber took on two shafts, because that you could really have a good B movie with that little fact. But but there was double penetration into the Queen's chamber. And this salt in the Queen's chamber wouldn't make any sense unless it was a kitchen. Okay, I'll move on. I'm sorry. So this hydrogen fuel would ignite the energy of the sound frequency going through the Grand Gallery, and it would go into the King's chamber. If we could pull up the King's chamber, which is the one that you were just at a moment ago, right there. So right off the bat, we see that this is weird. This is a strange thing. It's a device. Like, they try to talk about this as they say it's a relieving chamber for the weight of the rest of the pyramid, to relieve the weight. However, it doesn't perform that function, and it never has. And we know and so Egyptologists would say that, well, maybe it doesn't, but it was meant to. That went out the window really quick whenever we realized, and this is also not speculation, the entire King's chamber is isolated and floating inside of the pyramid. It's on top of corrugated, like egg carton type stone, so that there's no dampener involved. So the entire chamber is able to vibrate on its own accord, much less these individual stones, which goes exactly with what our friend was saying here, with what Ricardo was saying here about people going into the fucking King's chamber would make a quick exit because it freaked them out. There's a weird ambient energy in there that not supposedly, but was measured at 6 hertz. And the supposedly part is simply, why does 6 hertz make people have this dizzy, spellbound effect, But each one of these stones, you can see 5 here, but if we go to the next slide, you'll notice that they're stacked in the back as well. And each stone was able to ring like a bell. Let's see here. Well, a little bit more of it. I didn't number them. I should have numbered them.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
But that right there. So there's like 46 of these things, and none of them are touching each other either. That's very important, because that's very odd for a structure. There's like a guitar has a nut and a bridge that bind the stones together, but there's nothing in the middle for them to dampen on each other. They can vibrate freely. And that's what causes the F sharp, specific F sharp chord that comes from the King's chamber, which is very strange because Native Americans and Hindu people both tune their flutes to F sharp, claiming that it's the resonance of the earth, giving even more credence to the speculation that the pyramid vibrated to the same to a higher octave of the earth itself.
So what you're saying is that the stones stacked up there are lithophones? They're actually like instruments that can be played?
Right. So they have acoustical properties. If you tap on one, so on my episode tomorrow, I play samples from people tapping and knocking on these stones, and they sound super eerie too. It's a very magical type sound to it. So Chris Dunn wanted to confirm that it was an F sharp chord, so he brought his like tuning equipment and stuff in there so that he could actually record the information, because everything up until that point, they knew that it did acoustical things. They knew it was F sharp, all this stuff, but no one had ever recorded it and had it like on record where it can be proven, shown, and then open to the public. And that's exactly what he did. And God bless him for doing the legwork, because that's the only reason that I'm able to be talking about it, you know. But there is the weirdest thing here is what goes into the King's Chamber. And so between the Grand Gallery, you can see it here in the middle, but this isn't quite clear. If we go either to the last slide, I think, or one of these corresponding. Oh, by the way, this top is white limestone, by the way, just like the out. Take you stop right here though. The outside of the entire pyramid was in smooth, glossy, shiny white limestone, which is hard to imagine now. But if you look at my scalp, you can see that's what that would have looked like, Caucasian limestone. And so the top of that King's Chamber right there was also limestone. What's strange about this is that they didn't use the limestone that was native to Egypt. They traveled 500 miles to get this specific limestone that is free of magnesium, therefore not conductive. Now, it can be open to speculation whether or not they got it because it was non-conductive, but this limestone looks and weighs the same as the typical limestone found in Egypt. And it could be polished to a mirror smooth finish, which would have reflected sunlight right off of that puppy, which would have been important for any kind of engineering perspective. Whether or not the gold, the tip was gold, is speculative, but that's what a lot of people have said over the years. And that also lines up with Kriston's theory, along with Nikola Tesla, who based his Wardenclyffe Tower on the Great Pyramid design. That's where he got, he had the idea on his own in a flash, like a vision, like he did all the time. But to actually
if I may,
yeah.
The material that was supposed, if there was a tip, material in translation from Egyptian translates to a curious name. There is electrum. And all we know is that it is a mixture between gold, silver, and something else.
Wow.
There are still samples of the material.
Nevertheless, it must have been something conductive, though.
Well, electrum is a quite a telling name. So
yeah. I'm fascinated by the usage of the word L in ancient cultures, because I don't think there's a coincidence there, you know?
Coincidence takes planning.
Right. And so if we get that King's Chamber one more time, I want to show you these baffles right here. Yes. So where you see that number 9 right there, that is the top and end of the Grand Gallery. And that acoustical signal would have went through this horizontal shaft here and into the King's Chamber to vibrate these stones above it. But where it says number 2 right there is where we get really, really weird. So those 3 stones are hooked up by ropes, and they're hooked up to pulleys, which, by the way, they said that the Egyptians didn't have the wheel. However, this is a pulley system that still exists to this day. There's 3 stones that are hooked up to pulleys and could have been raised and lowered. None of them going all the way up, but none of them going all the way down, which is really weird because, again, the explanation by Egyptologists was once the king was entered into this King's Chamber, that's how they would shut the door. However, it doesn't do that function, and there's 3 of them. So,
if I could, that would actually change the Helmholtz resonance based off of the changing shape of that chamber.
Right.
That's the purpose of the portcullis. Yes.
Right. So they would tune that chord frequency coming from the Grand Gallery and get it down to a sharpened single pitch before going into the King's Chamber, hitting this box right here that they called a sarcophagus, and then would echo straight up into these stones to vibrate the corresponding stones that we just got done talking about. Meanwhile, not disturbing any of the rest of the pyramid with its vibrations, being that it was isolated, just like an engine in a car. So that's the basics of the pyramid from A to Z, skipping quite a few different details like that. The inside stone is is quartz granite rather than regular granite, and a million other little bitty things that take about an hour and a half to cover, as you'll see tomorrow, hopefully. But and we can open it up to like discussion at this point, because that's pretty much what the pyramid did, or that's the capabilities that the pyramid has. What they use this energy for, though, is anybody's guess, you know?
Well,
Like,
I would like to ask you, for instance, to me, the salt that you say you find inside is also found up to the third exterior layer of stones. And if you can connect that to the 4000 BC event, the Burckle crater, you'll find out that Egypt was actually flooded by the impact in the Indian Ocean around 4000 BC, and that the wave kept Egypt submerged for quite a time, enough to create even fossils, new fossils in the limestone. How do you call the exterior of the pyramid? The casing stones?
The casing stones, right.
So up to the third level, you find where the water was. So even the Sphinx was underwater. Probably it was that wave that knocked the head of the Sphinx down or damaged it. That's why they had to reshape it again and so on.
Sometimes I wonder if that surge of water was due to the Younger Dryas.
No. That's completely different time.
No, okay.
The Younger Dryas is 6,000 years ago, and the Burckle crater is from 3,200 to 4,000 BC. So it's a completely different date. So the Burckle crater impact is what caused the Great Flood, the biblical flood, the story of Noah, of Atarasis, of all of those people that escape on a boat. So it's all, this is not very debatable because it's been shown that it justifies exactly all we see in myths, in legend, and even in the Bible. So you find marks of these waves 300 kilometers inside Australia. So, and Australia is much further away than Egypt from the zone of impact. So all of that area was completely destroyed. So, and if you add that to the multiple impacts, because now we know that it wasn't just one impact, the Burckle crater, it was followed by multiple impacts. You have two on the Pacific, one in the Atlantic. So you have another surging wave coming from the Atlantic into the Mediterranean, and that caused havoc in all of that area. That's why you find many civilizations ending at that time, and a change in cultures and so on. So my question is, regarding that, the salt could very well be from this flooding. So the seawater evaporated,
right?
You get the salt encrusted in the walls.
That is addressed in the book. He talks about there not being the same salt in the well shaft of the pyramid, which is kind of interesting, because the well shaft, where that little vibration machine speculatively would have taken place, is the lowest point in the pyramid, and none of it is particularly waterproof. There is residue from salt water throughout the pyramid that I didn't realize was from that particular event. I just thought that there was flooding that took place, and that's awesome to know. However, this particular salt that is, you kind of say specific to the Queen's chamber, is inches thick of the salt. And the salt, whenever it's tested, doesn't line up with sea salt. It's specifically a combination of these two chemicals that create the hydrogen. And he talks about there being this residue in the shafts that come into the Queen's chamber, as each shaft can be tested for each individual chemical. One of which that had the acid solution corroded the stone away almost to hell. That was one of the debunks, was people were saying if this hydrochloric acid came in this shaft, it would erode the stone, and they were absolutely right. The stone is heavily eroded on the walls and the floor of that shaft, but not the ceiling. Whereas the other shaft has a different chemical that came into it.
But if for instance, in the ancient text, you have one paper called The Singing Pyramids, and it speaks of a traveler that's is going towards Giza, and way before he can see the pyramids, he starts hearing this thump, 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 thump. And this is one of the things that inspired Christopher Dunn, for instance.
Yeah.
And so this thump is produced by how much air you allow to enter through the portcullis. That is the system that you were defining, that creates a suction, that creates a constant pumping of the water in the bowels of the pyramid, that creates this frequency, this pump, that is a modulated frequency.
Yeah.
So how much you modulate the frequency, it turns out you need to calculate how much water you let in and how much air you allow to go in too. So it's like an engine, exactly as you were describing. So you have the butterfly to put air, the air puts the fuel. So it's the same thing. So if you have this constant pumping of water inside the Queen's chamber and the grotto and all of that, and you have even that small channel they call the well, that was kind of a escape security valve or whatever you want to call it. So if you have this constant pumping, the water is constantly being bounced into the ceiling of the structure and going down, and completely it will erode.
Right.
There's no, it's like thousands of years of erosion are done in a period of use of 100 or 200 or 500 years. So it's exponentiated. But my question to you is this: how do you see? Because I don't know if you are aware of this fellow called the Abyss that Nick already had in the show, and he has we have discussed this theory, and I think he even developed further than Christopher Dunn in his studies, and he tries to explain the hydrogen. And to me, the hydrogen is just a byproduct of what is going on inside the chamber, and not a fuel that is dumped into the chamber. Because like electricity, the Egyptians had no use whatsoever for that amount of electricity. So the production has that byproduct, but it's not something that they're using. So their civilization it's not based on electricity. They could use those small vases to do plating or to have that energy for some purpose that we don't know, but it's low voltage, and it can be done with some ease. It's not a very complicated thing. It's the funny thing is that they knew how to do it. That's the curious thing, not that they used it. So my question is, do you see that as they are putting hydrogen inside, or do you see it as a byproduct? Do you see what's the functionality that you see for it? That's my question to you.
I guess in two parts, I would say that I see it as functionality because of the rest of the pyramid, because of the association with the other components. It lines up with with everything else that the pyramid does, as kind of a amalgamation of different things. It might be a byproduct. It's important at this point to make clear that I've never been there and I've never conducted the studies. All the legwork was done by other people. I'm just here to kind of translate all of the stuff. But that is personally how I've seen it. Now, that's because I read Chris Dunn's work, though. Had I read this gentleman's work, it might augment my my hypothesis quite a bit. But the other way I might answer the question is the non-use of electricity in Egypt. I'm not so sure about, because of the wheel blade, the wheel sawing that's found in Egypt, where they had what seemed like gigantic saws cutting through limestone, and power drills that were being used that were, gigantic hollow tube drilling that were used in Egypt, that they can microscopically look at these ruts in the stone and see that a high RPM drill was going through this stone at one point. And there's these discarded stones in Egypt that have the cut mark in the stone going off kilter for several feet in a row, sometimes up to 6 feet in a row, before they stopped, realized that this, or might have realized that this is the wrong direction, and then discarded that stone back into the quarry for us to find later and be like, what made that cut like that? Because the Egyptologists, who are not engineers, say that they did it with string. they would rub the string back and forth or have copper chisels. And it's very strange to see those a copper chisel going and creating a tube through granite stone. It's never made any sense. And then it gets even more senseless whenever we see that to cut quartz granite, today they use hydrosonic technology. So it's like almost like a needle size cutting wheel that's a gem, or if not a diamond, and they speed up this diamond tip cutter, which is small, to the speed of this sound frequency that comes through it. And then they can cut through small gems like quartz. However, when they cut through limestone, that's the only way to get the limestone completely flat. Because if you take a saw and you cut through a limestone block, no matter how smooth you get it, even if you polish it down, microscopically, those little quartz particles are bulbous compared to the rest of the particles because they're harder. So the saw hits the other particles first and are more effective on them than the actual quartz, leaving these little microscopic nubs, right? What they found, and Chris Dunn sent this sample into a laboratory to say, hey, you know, what does this? Because it's perfectly flat. The quartz is as flat as the rest of the granite stone is. And they said that, well, they introduced to him their hydro cutting technology. And then their reply was, now we're curious, who's got tech who can do that kind of cutting in the world? We want to know who's got this new technology. And when he told them it was from ancient Egypt, they just about passed out. In fact, the email responding to them asked if it was a prank. It's a wild story.
I had something to add on the hydrogen angle. So hydrogen is a common off gas from electrolysis of water. And you've got the salt to act as the conductor or the electrolyte. And then you've got, you know, the electricity that we're talking about here. Mm. And the two of them together might create this sort of hydrogen and oxygen Brown's gas that you get from the water. And Brown's gas has an interesting property. It's used to cut through different metals, but it's not hot enough to do that. So there are certain properties of just electronically separated water as it's burning that don't make any physical sense. And so there is kind of an alchemical angle to just electronically separated water. They could have been using that in this process.
Right. And that is interesting about the water too, because with your saying and what Ricardo is saying is Egypt was synonymous with water once upon a time. The pyramid is built on a natural aquifer, which I think a lot of ancient sites are. And the Nile came up to the pyramids. I don't know how long ago that was. And it should note, by the way, that I'm almost under the hypothesis that the pyramids are older than people are saying. And I know that's redundant to say, but I'm thinking that they were in operation before the Younger Dryas and were put into disuse due to the Younger Dryas. And a lot of that does have to do with water as well.
But if they're using the Brown's gas, if it's creating Brown's gas and vibration, it makes sense that this would be like possibly for healing. Yes. Like I've heard that. So
that's the big speculation is if they weren't creating literal electricity for a civilization like we would today, well, then what was it for? Like,
have you heard of the Osiris shaft?
Yeah, no, I have not. If not the Osirion.
No. So the Osiris shaft is in the causeway. It's 1/3 when you go from the Sphinx to the pyramid.
Okay.
On the left side, if you're going up to the pyramid, there is an entry. There's lots of entries, but this one was studied, and this is called the Osiris shaft. So the Osiris shaft, if you look at, you can look at my paper about it. The Osiris shaft have 3 levels, probably more, but they found 3 levels, and those 3 levels have 3 vertical shafts from the 2nd level to the top without coming out of the ground. So they are inside the Mokatan formation, that where is Giza is placed. And so this work as tunnels of resonance, let's call it that way. So of all of the archaeoacoustic sites that I study, this is the only one that is autonomous. It doesn't need any introduction of sound. It works on its own. It is still working. And we know that it's still working because the water in the lowest level is structured water or easy water. And it doesn't take impurities. So it's full of garbage, rotten wood, but it can't contaminate the water. It just doesn't happen because it forms hexagons. The water forms molecules that are hexagons, and there's no space in the connection of the molecules to be any impurities into it. So
that's amazing. We need to do that today.
Yeah. So what happens is if you apply bandages with unguents to treat wounds with easy water or structured water, it makes the unguent permeate the skin because the easy water enters the skin like nothing else. So the treatment is much faster. But if you add these granite boxes that are in specific sized chambers cut into the limestone, each of them will produce a different resonance of the main frequency of the Osiris shaft. So you can produce different treatments if you put this water inside the stone boxes and put a person inside it, exactly as we are seeing now in high advanced medicine testing. They are putting people inside of these containers, as we see in Dragon Ball or Star Wars or whatever. They're putting these liquids. So if you go to the bottom level, you'll find a specific granite box that is not above the ground. It is completely inside the water. Only the lid is atop of the water. Besides, they have 4 highly quartz pillars that they broken probably on purpose, these 4 pillars that surround the coffin itself. And so that's why it's called the Osiris shaft, because as legend would imply, that's where they resuscitated and cured Osiris. That's the revival chamber down there, because it's the most powerful effect, because the box itself is within the water. So
I've never thought of that story as being literal, but with that, the healing and stuff being there might be more literal to that story than allegory, thinking about it.
Sure. Compared to testing and using the mechanisms described by the ancient Egypts associating with this Osiris shaft, the healing of a broken leg, for instance, would be 45 to 60% faster, for instance.
So it's an ancient hospital where they didn't poison people.
Exactly.
An ancient hospital without a Doritos vending machine. Amazing.
It
would deteriorate with time, but yes.
That's
that
I'll
idea.
have to look into that. I didn't know about the Osiris temple at all.
It makes me think of a whole new understanding or comprehension of hermetically sealed and occult, right? Going under there and getting healed. Another an esoteric idea that I more think now is hearing your presentation and contemplating those book ideas might have some even mechanical instruction to it. The King's Chamber is in a corresponding design with the Djed pillar, and the Djed pillar being the symbol for Osiris's spine and stability. And it's often depicted with the Ankh and the Waz, a staff. And all of those seem very, occulted mechanical constructs in a way too. But just, it's not an exact Djed, but it's so similar. The King's Chamber, the level of it, that it's worth just contemplation.
Yeah, both the Djed pillar and the Ankh, to me, supersede anything that would be just a symbol. They talk about the Ankh, it's a symbol for life. And then they say the Djed pillar, it's a symbol for transformation. And I'm over here like, who's got that answer and why? Because if I compare those answers to the other answers Egyptologists give, it's so bizarre that I have to almost throw them out the window. As a symbol for life, what isn't? Meanwhile, the ancient Egyptians described these things as devices that you could hold up to your nose and they did something, So if they look they look like technology, especially the Jed pillar looks like technology, you know, just at face value alone. There is one I wanted to talk about, the shafts that I wanted to talk about the Gatenbrink's door. Have you guys heard of the Gatenbrink's door at all?
Nope.
So all right, so I might go back to the slides one more time if that's okay for this part, but this part is a lot of fun. And this is where there's a little bit of drama going on between science and Egyptologists, because basically there's, when you go up this shaft, it dead ends and it doesn't go out, which the Egyptologists always say that the shafts were a magical means for the pharaoh's soul to leave. And then they would say, and this is on the documentary, where they say, well, if the soul left through the shaft, why is it closed off? The Egyptology deadass says, oh, because he's a magical pharaoh, his spirit is so magical, he can get past the door. And then they say, then, well, why is there a door? And dude, they came up with a different answer, and each answer they gave was on the fly, and each answer they gave were different than the other Egyptologists. It was so bizarre to watch. I had to find these clips in different places and put them all into one and put them back to back, just to make it so as comical as it did. Nevertheless, knowing that this shaft dead ended into this Gatenbrink door with the 2 copper handles, Chris Dunn made a prediction in his book about what that room would contain. Egyptologists said, if you go in that room, you're going to find a mummy, some kind of like tapestry, ancient papyrus. You're going to find treasures of Khufu, all this stuff. They said that's what you're going to find back there. And Chris Dunn, under the power plant hypothesis in 1998, said, I bet you that room is about 9 inches by 9 inches, maybe a foot by a foot. And he said those copper handles that the pharaoh would grab onto so his spirit could go out were probably electrodes that hook up to copper into that room in the back that signaled like a fuel level sender in a fuel tank, that it would get low, that the hydrogen would get low. And this kind of takes us back to the hydrogen too. And that was his prediction. He drew the whole thing up in the book in 1998. And then in 2002, a new rover came to town, and they said they got permission, and they said, can we drill through Gatenbrink's door and see what's in there? And after years of getting hard up on it, they finally got permission to do so under a controlled setting. But when they did it, they went live on Fox to look in that door for the first time. And it is an absolute spectacle to watch Dr. Zahi Hawass damn near lose his fucking mind live on TV when they had to shut down the cameras real quick. And
was Geraldo Rivera involved?
No, he wasn't, but it was one of those things.
Al Capone's thing.
Right. It's just an empty safe.
Right. That's what it was like. And no one expected this. Everyone thought it was a flop. They're like, oh, it's a flop discovery. Meanwhile, Hawass is in the back. He's sweating. He's red in the face, which it is. It's hot in Egypt, whatever. But he pounds the table, and he's like, he's not making an angry face. He's forcing this weird smile. And he's like, all right, well, that's all we have today. And he's like interrupting the presenter and shit. So basically what happened was, can we pull up a picture of Gatenbrink's door real quick? So keep on going. I'll tell you when.
I have a quick note of, sorry, Joey.
No, you're good. Oh, so let me stop right here real quick. The top here is a piece of cedar. It's a piece of wood, right? Egyptologists threw it in the museum because they had no idea it would completely undermine their entire theory. Now, I don't even call it a theory. Basically, the guesswork that Egyptologists did early in the 19th century, before we had machines, by the way. This is important to remember. Egyptology became a career before machines were invented. We had nothing to compare it to in our hive mind yet. So not only would this have been unspeakable, it would have been unthinkable, weirder than we can imagine. But nevertheless, this piece of cedar was hooked up to this copper hook right here, and it was in the queen's chamber with the hydrogen. So if we go back to that one slide where Gatenbrink's door was at, which is actually a clip that I took. This is a freeze frame from the live footage that I show tomorrow, which you don't have to wait for my episode tomorrow. It's called Opening of the Secret Shaft live on Fox. You can watch it. It's 2 hours long, but just skip to the end. So these circles here, these red circles, are copper, recessed copper prongs. Basically, the Egyptologists would say that those copper prongs were put there so that the block could not be lifted up out of place by grave robbers. After finding out that they would not serve that purpose because that entire part of the pyramid is completely closed off, they switched their theory to, well, that's where they hooked the ropes up so that they could enter this stone into the shaft. Then they found out that these copper prongs are actually recessed in the back, so they're flush with the stone. After that was thrown out, they switched it to the newest one, which is that's where the pharaoh's magical spirit grabbed on so that his soul could exit the shaft. Each explanation getting weirder and weirder as it goes. But nevertheless, that copper hook we just looked at is the same dimension as those copper prongs right there. They would have hooked up to that according to the power plant theory, and when the cedar would float on the hydrogen fluid, it would go down with the fluid. The copper prongs would disconnect from these antinodes. I'm messing that word up. What did Chris call them? I forgot. You get the idea though. There's a charge between the two of them, and just like a fuel level sender in our gas tanks, it would let the guys know outside the pyramid to re-up on that good whenever it got low. So whenever that hole is drilled into that door right there, that's the hole right there that they drilled in for Fox News to do their live presentation. The camera, and this is spoiler alert, by the way, the camera goes into that hole and immediately finds a dead end into a room that is 9 inches by 9 inches. The dimensions that Chris Dunn came up with as to fit the rest of the power plant.
So, but are you saying that this was also flooded?
This part was not flooded as far as I know.
Oh, you're saying that the cedar was floating.
Right. So on the back of Gatenbrink's door, there would have been a room in there that would have been the floater, so to speak. So it's an insane. It's one of those things where no one can really be positive as to what this did, but what I think can be said for sure is that it did something, and it wasn't for a magical spirit to go floating out into the stars, unless it was.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Joey. I was about to get back to that. There, you mentioned Pharaoh's spirits launching off into the stars.
Right?
Were they catching Halley's Comet?
See,
were they wearing some purple robes and some Nikes? What are we talking about here?
That's that. So this is where we kind of come unhinged a little bit, and so where it goes from things we can hold, measure, and weigh, and into speculation is when we mix mythology with the rest of these utilities here. So let's say we drop the power plant idea for a moment and say, okay, maybe it didn't create free energy like we would all hope and dream, and it wasn't a Nikola Tesla thing like everyone's perfect reality would be.
What could do both, right?
What's up?
Could do both, right?
So this is where it gets kind of weird. Is mythology states that the pharaohs would exit their soul through, and this was exacerbated by Egyptologists, of course, who didn't understand science. So what if it's both? If it's both, this gets really weird, because the world over in mythology, pyramids were built by giants. If you go to Mexico, if you go, I mean,
Right.
you name the continent and you ask the indigenous people who built that, they will tell you giants built it. And then we dismiss it because, well, it's fantasy, right?
Well, that's the evidence here in America, right? They're the giants that built the some of the older mound structures.
Right. So always attributed to giants, right? So if we go to the Bible, where the pyramid is never mentioned, by the way, the reason giants exist was because of interbreeding with fallen angels, and then they became called Nephilim.
Right.
So in America, there's roughly half a dozen different words for Nephilim, but in Native American cultures, all of which did the same thing. They brought technology to human beings from the stars and then mated with human women. Not a fair trade, by the way, if you ask me, but then got them pregnant and then they gave birth to giant, hyper capable, hyper intelligent men who could bend reality with magic. Now, let's assume that magic isn't real and say that a good way to explain magic, with quotes, is technology we don't understand. So, given that these Nephilim understood the mechanics of the universe enough to create incredible technological power, hence is why the Bible says, and all these other myths say, that they got technology from these fallen angels and then passed it down to their sons, the Nephilim. These hyper capable beings trapped here on Earth would probably want to phone home. They want to get out of here, which all of a sudden brings me to the wackiest and silliest conspiracy about the pyramids, that they were built by aliens, something I don't adhere to. Nevertheless, if you combine all three of these theories, electromagnetic power involving plasma, a form of plasma. I know plasma isn't an umbrella term, but let's plasma for now. You mix that with mythology, they were built by giants who had technology and were frankly angry to be here. And then you mix that with the modern conspiracy theory that they were built by aliens. If you combine all three together, it seems to me that the pyramids, along with a lot of other ancient sites that were used to make your brain outside your body, might have been built by Nephilim people who couldn't stand being here next to all of us animals.
Well, there's a lot of case for that with John D. He constantly talks about how the angels do not like us, period, dot. And they don't like how we smell. They don't like how we are. They don't like anything. They don't like us. And so, yeah, I could see that. And when we're talking about, Nephilim, I mean, probably talking about interdimensional type situation anyways.
Right.
I mean, they're going to try to get out of here, but obviously, I mean, they didn't know. Yeah.
What I find interesting, Joey, is the astrotheological aspects, how you explain these launching the pharaohs to the stars. That is the mound builders, theology as well.
Right.
These Adena mound cultures. We were just talking about to Dr. Greg Little about the same subject the other day here on the Occult Rejects. Not sure if that show's published yet, though, but good conversation nonetheless. And that is their culture, and they are, those giants at the base of those Adena mounds came from somewhere. You know what I mean?
And in mythology, according to mythology, they came from the stars. In fact, in native cultures, the words that I can't pronounce for them translate to rebel stars, star people.
Sure.
And the pyramid shafts, by the way, and again, this is one of those things that undermines Chris Dunn's power plant theory, but it can't be ignored. Those shafts are aimed to particular stars, one of which is Draco, and one of which is Sirius. Yeah.
Sure.
So, I mean, that opens up to a lot of conspiracy about their species being reptile in nature. But on that point, we kind of start tiptoeing on some other, some other facets. But then again, these therianthropes from ancient times that were pre-Nephilim were there a lot of times were depicted as feathered serpents. Dagon was a fish. They all had scales, basically.
Well, it says that the giants mated with not only humans but animals, and that there were things that were created. Yeah.
Right.
But to go back to something that Ethan said about the Djed, that was really interesting to me because the King's Chamber has the 5 tiers. So an original Djed also has 5 tiers. Just like in original Sefer Yetzirah, there actually are 5 worlds, even though most people only know there are 4. But the 5th is like ineffable. It's formless. There's no husk. It's the Adam Kadmon, whatever, alternate Quicksilver Man dimension. But so I like the speculative idea, Joey, that you're talking about. Like that, that's my personal orientation, where I think that they're more of a theurgic vehicle. Like you could say that there's part of the pyramids that are Hekalot, and then there's also part that's a Merkaba, because that's the architectural physical form, the husk, maybe you could say, of the pyramid. But like the energy flows inside, that's the vehicle, that's the Hekalot.
Yeah.
And then they want to project outwards or upwards. And you showed that image of the 3 dots. Well, in Tantra, this makes a lot of sense because you would have a key. So like the Ankh, there would be a key to turn wheels, right? And like even the pyramids, it does seem to, I personally think of them as more locks maybe, or representations of maybe chthonic events.
Right.
So like how the Nile turns, the Nile flows backwards compared to all the other rivers. I have a crazy theory that maybe they turn the lock, and the locks actually aren't universal. Like they don't work throughout the world. Maybe there are ripples, but it's localized. So then they turn the Nile back in that specific area. But I actually don't really think that they know how to like fix it, because I think if they did know how to fix it or rectify it, then maybe they would. I don't know. This is an idea, but I like the speculative idea that they are theurgic tools. Like it could be, like you said, like maybe there are like rebel magicians who just want to get out of this like hellish, like material. They're very Gnostic, right? Like they're very like, we want to leave the body. But the interesting thing about Djed is it refers to Osiris's spine. So in Hebrew, this is the luz. So this is the almond. So you are always resurrected. This is the part of you, if you want to believe in that cosmology, that gets reincarnated. It's the part that's eternal.
Right.
Maybe with the Nephilim, because they're here illegally. See, they're here without a spirit, and they're not really a creation of God. They're created by other means, right? So possibly with them, maybe they need that obscene energy, to exist or recreate and come back. Or they're trying to get out, but at least continue to exist is what I'm saying.
Right. If we are to accept the Hindu cosmology, that kind of is similar to Gnostic ideas, that there is a closed system around the orbit of Saturn that has been called loosely the black cube. You would need a lot of power to break through that, dare I say, firmament, without too many viewers losing their minds. But like if samsara is a closed system where even if these Nephilim men who can't stand on Earth, if they were to kill themselves to get out of it, they would just be reincarnated right back down, and this time maybe not even into a giant's body, but into one of us, rascally bastards down here. They are orphaned on Earth, and at no fault of their own.
No, and you did mention that they're reptilian, but possibly that lack of a spirit, you're going to act a lot different than a regular person as well. So.
I think that the fallen angels were described as reptilian, like Dagon, or these fish, Quetzalcoatl, serpent people. The Nephilim, however, as far as I know,
they weren't fallen, were they? Weren't they the mixed breeding creation with animals, as what I thought?
Those like Dagon, Quetzalcoatl, they said came directly from the stars. They were like, they came here. Now Dagon came up out of the water, now. I mean, so just a distinction there. So it's really fuzzy, but it wasn't said that they were descendants of the fallen angels so much. Which, by the way, they don't attribute Dagon as the fallen angel per se, but these are two different. I mean, it's to me, whenever something's got scales and it's described this way, and it came from the stars that came to teach mankind or whatever, I start to say maybe we have different names for the same story. Like the old axiom goes, the names have changed, but the story stays the same. You know, but these giants are described as human, without scales, without feathers, and they were just hyper capable, hyper smart, you know, hyper big or whatever. And they would have not, and like you're saying though, they would have had that divine spark in them it was popping. You know, like they were not all humans, so to speak, which is very strange because they were big mammals. If you ever seen a liger before? It's a cross between a lion and a tiger, and they're huge, far bigger than both parents. The only way a liger can happen is if a male lion mates with a female tiger. You can't have it the other way around. That's all these fallen angels were male. They were attracted to women. They none of them were female. This is where it starts to get really kind of eerie, because a male lion has dominant growth hormone genes. And when it's called unregulated growth hormone. And when the tiger, who is the mother, obviously wants that regulated growth hormone to be suppressed so that it can carry this baby, because it's going to be a huge pain in the ass. So,
well, the birth of the mixed children didn't go well for the mother.
Yeah, that's the first C-section. And I was shocked when I read about C-sections in the Bible. That it blew my mind, because if this is allegory, why are they talking about surgery? You know, but the fact that a liger, a cross between a male lion and a female tiger, they grow to well over 1,000 pounds, much, not bigger than both parents, much larger than both parents. I start to say, this is the same story, but that would make fallen angels mammal. So that throws a wrench in the whole damn thing.
Well, speaking of mammals, Joey, I just want to jump in and add something. You mentioned like a serpentine star when you were showing the chamber. We're speculatively saying that the soul projects outwards towards these three stars.
Draco,
right, Draco, excuse me. So there's an idea in Tantra that, like, we even spoke about this on the Steiner episode we just did, is there's an idea of like Lucifer and Ahriman, but like I always say, it's very much like the Tantric cosmology. It's like Rahu and Ketu. And even in the Egyptian things, like I'm not versed in that. Like everyone else knows a lot more about that than me, but I do know like my Himalayan cosmology quite well. So when I look at the Egyptian stuff, I do see a lot of similarities, but I can't necessarily map it one-to-one. But I do think that there's a element of what you're talking about, like a dragon who is numinous, meaning he's of space. In Buddhism, Rahu is the king of Za. So he is the king of space, the black matter. And he's also the lord of the demonic hosts of the planets and the stars. So I don't know, something kind of interesting about that.
If we were to speculate that the word you used wasn't ether, but refresh me.
You could say it's like Akasha.
Yeah, well, like ether to me, it sounds like plasma. You know, like the fifth state of matter, like you said about, I think the Kabbalah, how there's those those 5 stages. You know, I don't know if there's a correlation there. But,
yeah, there is, because there's only 5 chakras in the original tantric system.
Okay.
The 7 chakras are actually only for hatha yoga.
I did not know that. See, that gets very strange, because it sounds a lot like the 5 basic elements that Aristotle proposed. And if ether is plasma, therefore, you know, the black of space, stars, we might get a little keyhole into this mammal problem. How did fallen angels mate with human women to make giants in the first place if they weren't mammal? And so stars are made out of plasma, which is, they're called fallen stars. They're called rebel stars. And plasma is the only thing that we would be able to use to artificially inseminate a virgin, a woman. You can't, an angel, fallen angels don't have dicks, like my grandma used to say. How were they knocking anyone up? So if this was a form of technology, instead of literally, in the Bible it says they came on to the daughters of man. That sounds like sex. And it also says they sinned against, when they got done coming onto the women, they sinned against other creatures like beasts of the earth and birds of the sky. Sinned against. So if we are to say maybe they didn't have a word for in vitro back then, which they didn't, the people doing this who wrote this years later, by the way, certainly didn't have a word for artificial inseminating in vitro. Well, the way to do this would be through plasma, of which stars are made out of. This might be a translation mix-up. What if people took this technology that was associated with the stars, which is plasma, and used it to experiment on us, on people, and created Nephilim by mistake out of curiosity, like fucking Jurassic Park? And then it became a whole biblical mythology later. What's up, Headless?
I had something to throw in. They did call Egypt the land of chem, right? And this land of chem is where we get our term chemistry from.
Yeah.
And the ancient form of alchemy heavily relied on the astrological positions of planets and stars for them to get the right proper mix. And you're saying that these shafts are aiming towards these different stars on different dates. So
Right.
not only that, but they also used a lot of astrology when it came to animal husbandry as well. So there is that angle as well. So if you're talking about artificial insemination during these times during the year when these stars are lining up,
Dude, and that
We
goes
talk
way.
about-
There's also a lot of documentation of artificial insemination being used in horses around the 12th century, 11th century. It's highly documented in some of these texts. So they already had.
And in Diana of Ephesus, they talk of this clear back, like way back in India, they talk about this. So yeah.
Then they knew how to do it long time ago. So that's not, but if I may, I want to say one thing. If the pyramid was built by giants, and I like to state the difference because people tend to confuse this. Gigantism is a disease. Being a giant isn't. So we still have giants today, and there are very fair amount of giants documented. You can go into my paper, There Were Giants Upon the Earth. You'll find lots of reference to actual giant people. We don't need mojo jumbo to try to justify something that is actually real and undeniable. We have documentation from at least 2,000, 3,000 years of giants, well documented. But if the pyramids were built by giants, and you go to the king's chamber and you find the granite box that is in there, you cannot fit a giant in there.
Right.
And if you have a granite box in a highly acoustic chamber within an electromagnetic prepare structure, you are actually telling that you are going to put someone into the box and that person is going to the stars. That's literally what we're doing. So it's an isolation chamber. It's an initiation chamber. Because if you see this occult people are obsessed with rituals of death and rebirth.
Right.
And if you go even to the Osiris, every place in the world, be the Maya, the Inca, it doesn't matter. The pros, even today, to the Rosicrucians, to the Masons, to the Merovingians, all of them follow the same protocol. You descend into the underworld. That means you go through a tunnel into the depths of the earth. You go into a box and you die. Then you are revitalized at dawn. You go through the waters into the light. So there's always the element of darkness, simulation of death, some a box or granite box or wooden box, it doesn't matter, it depends on how they do this. Then you are awakened, probably take a drug, you are awakened at dawn, and you are driven through the water. That's exactly what you see on the Osiris. You see the tunnel, you see the city, the place where they put to sleep or they meditate or whatever you want to call it. And then you were brought through that vein of water into that east, because that balcony that was filled with water is completely driven to the east. So they emerge from the water into the light, exactly as a birth. You come from the water of the mother. It's exactly the same process.
I was going to say reverse birth.
Exactly. So
a question comes to my mind, though. So the coffer, so to speak, in the king's chamber is too small, just about for anybody. How big are those boxes that you said were in the water?
More than enough for a normal human.
That's interesting.
More than enough, and they are much more robust than the one that is on the king's chamber. And they are movable. The queen's chamber is not movable.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if there's a connection there. I mean, at this point, we're almost in the realm of speculation. But I wonder why those boxes were so big and what those were used for. I mean, the healing thing, of course.
No, they are not as big as the ones in the what is it called? No, there's ones in underground. They're actually bigger than the gigantic bull of mythology. I don't remember how it's called. If anyone there knows the name of that structure, where you have those massive sarcophagus.
Yeah, I got it. So this is the Saqqara, right? If I can angle this right. So in Dunn's second book, which I don't really cover much yet, but it's on the way. I'll show you the picture here. So there's these gigantic tubs.
Exactly.
There's 22 of them. And the dimensions of these tubs are 13 feet by 7.5 feet and 8 feet high. So they're about the size of a bus, a small bus. And I don't know if Egyptologists have ever listed what their explanation for these tubs are.
To the cremation of the what's the name of the bull god? Did you know, Headless?
You talking about Molech?
No, the Apis. Could it be Apis?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. So they made. I'm not saying that's the initial purpose,
right?
But at least we know that it is well documented that at some time they were burning bulls and putting the bones inside of this.
Right.
Of these boxes. But if that was the problem of those boxes, is how did they got there? Because they don't fit the tunnels.
They must have been built first. That's wild, dude. Which makes them.
Was it only bulls? It was not heifers?
Oh, I think they found different bones of animals, not just one specific animal, but different ones. I can't remember exactly which ones.
It's reminiscent of the episode we did that the ashes of Bos Taurus, right? The breed or the species is used for purification in rituals. So
sure, you find, for instance, in Portugal, you have a place in the north that, although they say that it was used by the Romans, it's much older than that. But the Romans used it as an Egyptian temple. So you have Egyptian characters in a structure up north in Portugal. So it was dedicated to Isis and the god of death. I can't remember the name right now. You are muted.
Isis and Osiris. This book right here, The Golden Ass, talks about how Osiris and Isis worship was still being practiced well into the 100 AD period. So they still had those cults pretty active during the Roman period. So there is a lot of continuity going on between the Egyptian and the Roman time periods.
Sure. And they carved these little boxes into some big, some very big, some small boxes direct into the mother rock. Some had marks where you find that they used to have the lid. And they say that it's according to the markings that are carved there by the Romans, they were burning people's pets. So when someone, a Roman, lost a cat or a dog, they would take it there. It would be burned inside of these boxes to help to take it to another realm or something like that. But that was not the initial use.
Right.
Because if you look at the floor of the whole site, the floor is covered with at least what you called this thick, I don't know if this is half an inch or whatever, of quartz dust.
Mhm.
The whole floor, after all this time, still has a huge layer of quartz dust on the
Wow.
ground. So whatever they're doing, they were grinding something, and something had to do with crystal. So
Yeah.
I theorized that they were creating massive amounts of crystal inside these boxes that were then used for several purposes, as lighthouses, as mirrors, as magical objects or whatever. So they were made in there. They grind the quartz, they put it into these boxes. And I looked in if science did the same thing today, and they do. So they can grind the quartz and then create this industrial quartz from that, use an additive to the mixture, and it solidifies into whatever structure is put it on. So this granite box would be perfect for that. But this doesn't apply to Egyptians. I was just saying that these
Right.
ceremonies of using these boxes has been passed from many meanings and many uses through the ages. We have no idea why they were made in the first place, or how they were made, for that matter.
I think that is an important distinction for everybody to hear, that it's not so strange to think that these sites were inherited, found, and reused for ceremonial purposes without ever knowing what the original intent was. Hell, I live in St. Louis, and if you go to there's a bar, you have some drinks, right? And it's like stone pillars and like gargoyles. Well, it wasn't a bar before. It used to be a post office, and now it's been refurbished or whatever. So you go to the bar and you look around and you're like, this used to be something else, which is the eerie feeling people get when they go to these ancient sites, and they're like, you're calling this a tomb. Why is there crystals all over the place? Why are, and I'm really glad you said that about the crystals, dude, because in this book, he also says that he's got a list of possible purposes for these giant granite boxes. And one of them is kind of tucked away in the book, but he talks about how it's recessed. The boxes are recessed into the ground below ground level. And the tube that comes in to this room, it doesn't go to the floor. It's like 4 feet above the floor, to where there's a temperature drop when you go in. And then you mix that with the fact that the inside of those tubs are, like we were talking about earlier, completely flat. They're microscopically mirror flat, to a point to where we have difficulty doing it today, and don't do it today on large scale.
1,000 of an inch, yes, 1,000 of an inch.
Yeah. And he talks about this need for perfection would only be necessary, and that's where he gets to the list. He's like, airplane components, blah blah blah, and then it says crystals right there. He says growing crystals, which, man, if you're growing crystals, then you're doing something that we don't understand today, because I don't think we understand crystals today. We use them on our phones, but
you use it in everything.
Right.
It's their vibration that tells the time. It's not your watch.
Right.
It's the vibration of the crystal.
Well, particularly when it comes to growing crystals, you want completely flat surfaces so you can predict where the seed crystals are going to take root and then start growing from there. So that would kind of make sense.
That's wild.
Well, I would add that they are now showing in many archaeological sites, and they are adding this layer of information that you don't find in previous studies. So you start questioning. So were the team of archaeologists that was before in the same site was blind, or what was going on? Because now they are saying that sites that we know have papers before these new ones, they are now describing lots of crystals around these sites. And the mounds in the United States, in megalithic sites around Europe, they are now describing that. What is all of this crystals doing in here? Why are they not documented? And I speculated this first in terms of the mounds. We in Europe, because of movies and cartoons, they told us that the Indians would make a fire, and with a blanket They will shape the smoke to communicate to long distances. Well,
Right.
there are a lot of problems with this system of communication. It's dependent of wind, of rain, of lots of things, and so it makes it practically impractical. But there is one thing that works all the time, no matter how the weather is, and that is turboluminescence. So what happens is, if you grab two pieces of quartz or crystal and you rub them together, you create this turboluminescence that are flashes of light, and you can control them. So you can use it as a Morse code. And we know that this ancient indigenous peoples, most of them have a system of communication that is almost like dots, or and so you start thinking of dots as signals of light. And so even during the night, you could communicate from mount to mount using this luminescence of quartz, and that would justify, because each time you produce a flare of light that comes from inside the crystal, not outside. This effect happens inside the quartz. It's not external, but the quartz is extremely fragile material. So each time you do that, you'll flake the quartz, and you constantly need new bits because you're constantly scraping. And I have quartz to do that, and you just grabbing them too strong and you flake them. So it's a material very. Go on.
Could it be the resonation between the crystal and the energy if they're illegal spirits and they don't have the silver cord, like a possibility of a false silver cord?
Well,
this is just a thought.
Well, that reminds me of the piezoelectricity that takes place when you put friction on quartz crystal, especially with another quartz crystal that we have in the middle of our head, in the pineal gland. And if that is, as many ancients have, I think all of them have introduced the idea that we are a transducer that picks up divine signals, messages, whatever culture calls them, through like a receiver, like an antenna through our pineal gland. And that's quartz crystal that specifically does that. They would want to mass produce those puppies on an epic level, like we see in the Saqqara tomb and in the Osiris shaft.
And that's the funny thing, because we are told that piezoelectric effect needs pressure.
Right.
It means, for instance, if you are in a very dark room and you have a very high quartz stone and you put it in an hydraulic press, if you have complete darkness, you can see the veins of quartz in the matrix, the crystalline matrix of that piece will lighten up.
Yeah.
Depending on the pressure. But what they didn't want to recognize, but are now forced to, is that you don't need the weight. You can also do it with sound. The sound can create these standing waves inside these structures, because the sound has nowhere to go. So it goes back and forward until it creates a standing wave with these nodes. So have you seen the acoustic levitation stationary position?
I have not.
Okay, so they produce these two metal plates and they produce a frequency. Okay, and as soon as it reaches the point of a standing wave, you can grab these balls of what do you call spherovite? How do you call this material that is very light? The white stuff that comes to protect the TVs and all of that stuff. I don't know how it's called. Styrofoam. Okay, they put these balls of styrofoam and they throw it into the middle of the plates, and they get stuck in the same place because the waves are not moving. They are completely static.
Yeah.
And that suspends that ball wherever they place it. They have these nodes, and it stays there. It doesn't move.
Right.
Okay? So this is a standing wave. And so when you reach this point, you start creating pressure into the quartz of the materials. So that's why when you go to the megalithic world, you go to Newgrange, you go to West Kennet, Long Barrow, you go to, I don't know, all of these cairns and types of spaces. You see that there is something called vibration imprinting. And vibration imprinting is something that we are starting to use today, that is to excite crystal to absorb information. And that information is stable across vast distance of time. It's far better than any system that we have right now. And they didn't manage to reach the limit that the crystal can contain information. So it just can put it in and in and in and in, and it doesn't overload. So you have this culture of the ancestors, right? So it's the religion of the ancestors, the honoring the ancestors. But what if that is a misunderstanding of what it was actually? That is, you go to this megalithic sites, you create a ceremony, and according to specific frequencies or specific songs that create specific frequencies that create specific standing waves, you activate these crystals in a sense that you can retrieve, even if metaphysically, even if just by brain entrainment, you can receive the information of previous cults that were there, or even of ceremonies that are being done on the other side of the world, but because the frequency signature is the same, they are completely connected. So these long distance communication systems existed in the past. For instance, you can communicate from the mainland Greece, mainland Malta, to an island that is called Lampedusa, that is 60 kilometers away, right, across the ocean, and you can speak within this temple, and it's the Hagarda, something like that. It's not the ice cream, but it's close to that. You speak on that temple, and you hear the sound 60 kilometers away on this smaller semicircle that is on the island of Lampedusa. So you can pass on the communication from one side to the other because the coolness of the water. So when you emit a sound, it starts to stretch and lose volume. But the coolness of the water in a calm day would constantly recompress the wave, so it reaches 60 kilometers away exactly at the same volume that it was emitted where it was placed. Another example is in the main chamber of the West Canada Long Barrow. If you speak, your sound will appear at the same volume 660 feet away in the West Canada Short Barrow, that it's not connected, only fields around it, and the sound will appear on that chamber exactly as it was spoken on the West Canada Long Barrow. For
What
instance,
about 667 feet away?
No, the chamber is exactly 665.
Oh, that's where it's okay.
It's 200 meters, so I'm just translating it to feet. So they knew how to do these things.
Right.
They knew how to communicate long distance. You found in America, in France, this recessed areas in cliffs. Some are natural, some are further enhanced by human hand. And there are 140 of them on this cliff through the miles that it goes. But when they tested them, only those that have pictographs, only those that have drawings on the walls worked. And what they did is they seated a person in front of this recess, and then someone beyond the horizon would speak directly to the cliff. And the person that is seated here will hear that person as if he was next to him. And if you want to communicate to that person, you just turn around and speak to the recess on the wall, and the person on the other side will receive your sound. So there's a lot of, so that's why I believe that the megalithic world, the original one, was a type 1 civilization. They obtained all the energy, all the things that they needed from the earth itself or from the sun indirectly. And now we are very far away from that. So when we speak that we are most advanced right now, I just, my feeling is to laugh because we are far from being advanced in anything.
Well, I will just jump in and say that I have a friend who is very innovative in the field of crystal quantum computing, and it's a very real technology, and he's also a very skilled Kabbalist. So I think that there is, like what Joey was saying, like there is a place where technology and magic are exactly the same thing. There's really no distinction. It's barely any difference. It really is up to us and our discernment. I agree with that. But about the crystals, I think, like in Buddhism, how we describe it is you have these large quartz, you produce the specific seeds using maybe instruments, but there's an idea that you can also produce it from yourself. And so maybe it's also linked to consciousness. So when you're speaking the seed and you're also applying like those forces of consciousness or mind, you can create the 5 primordial colors, which is yellow, green, red, white, and of course clear. So I don't know about long distance, but this is considered very possible to like perform like even now.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about those kinds of experiences.
Look, I'm not trying to promote myself, and I will send the book freely to anyone that asks. But if you read the Resonance Earth, I explore all these facts from a scientific point of view, and I substantiate every claim that I make, for wildest that it is, with science that we are doing right now. People just don't associate things. But
Right.
we are doing exactly the same thing that they were doing back then. In fact,
Yeah.
we are trying to learn how to do it without some success, and they were actually doing it back then.
Dude, I'll read the shit out of your book, dude. Don't be shy about that. Send it over, dude. I'll talk about it on an episode or something like that. I can't wait.
You know, something I want to mention real quick too. Talking about I guess crystals and transferring things. Athanasius Kircher, which I think it was like in the 1600s, maybe 1700s, he was stating that he believed that in the future, with light and crystals, you would be able to transmit spirits and demons. And basically, when you look at crystals in your TV and how the internet works, the optical cable, I mean, that's exactly what's going on right now.
Yeah.
But no one knows how it works.
Right.
But a Jesuit priest was telling you it was going to happen.
Scientist had something a hot minute ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Huh?
Sorry?
Mad Scientist had something to say, but she didn't get quite in there.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Lisa.
about the crystals thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, about the crystals in your ear. That's how you hear.
And,
Yeah. You had mentioned that. Yeah. What was that about again? You had said that real quick. And can you talk a little bit more about that?
No, because we were talking about how the pineal is crystallized, or it's a crystal.
Yeah.
What were you saying about the pineal?
Well,
if they become destabilized, you lose all sense of balance. This happens when people fly or go on cruises or whatever. The crystals in your ear literally are hugely important to Lisa.
Dude. Okay, hold up.
Pressure
I'm
and
sorry.
resistance.
I'm deaf in my left ear, and I have been since I was very young. And I can't be in the car for if any amount of time. I get very car sick. I get very nauseous. I've done all of the whatever Dramamine, ginger,
acupuncture,
dude. I cannot.
There's some maneuvers that you can look up. Ear crystal maneuver.
What?
An acupuncture.
I got real messed up after a cruise. This is why I got land sick. I wasn't seasick. I just couldn't walk straight for a week after my cruise. So this is why I ended up knowing this.
Joey, do you get dizzy easily?
Huh? What's up?
Whoops. I'm sorry, my internet broke out right when I said something. Does that affect your dizziness? Do you get dizzy easily?
It's a claustrophobic, nauseous vertigo when I'm in a car, and it doesn't matter with the windows open, windows down. Dude, I'll go on a boat. I'll go on a roller coaster. None of that shit bothers me. A car, I can't do it. It's just subtle enough or whatever. I've always associated because I get sick right here. But I've never
even driving?
Huh?
Even
not if I'm driving.
Oh,
as a passenger.
Okay. So for everybody, this is called the Epley maneuver. Just so you know, this is a real medical thing, and it can help realign the crystals in your ear.
Dude, I've been alive for 38 years, and no one has brought this to my attention. I had no idea.
Meniere's disease is also another thing where you have vertigo, and you cannot, like you're physiologically incapacitated. And it's all due to the disalignment, like Heidi was saying, of crystals, but also it's also the point it's causing inflammation as well. And it's mimicking kind of like, like vertigo and everything, but it's also mimicking car sickness, and you're just standing still. Mm-hmm.
Right.
There's if you go to an ENT, I'm sure they'll tell you all kinds of putting steroids in your ear or severing the nerve to your ear. They'll go through all of that, and usually it does not do anything but mitigate symptoms.
Yeah.
But definitely I've heard that from several people that acupuncture has almost corrected and eliminated the situation, as well as doing the maneuvers to where you need to realign and out of place. and they have fallen in disalignment.
Yeah.
So you need to do, head maneuvers or whatever.
I got some work to do ahead of me.
Make some special earplugs for this as well. Just FYI, it's that you wear during the day that minimize certain sound. You can look into this. It will help you. I'm a nurse. This is real.
Okay. Good. No, that's fantastic. I've always assumed it was the stomach.
No, it's good. You won't walk for a year, but when you start, it's perfect.
I had a couple of things. So my great grandmother had this home remedy that always worked when I was car sick. You take a brown paper bag and you put it in your pants. I don't know why.
I already do that.
You already do that?
It's done. Is that not normal? I don't know. But
I don't know. But she said that's gets rid of car sickness, and she was going across the prairie in a covered wagon, so she knew about car sickness.
Focusing on the uncomfortability.
She a Mormon?
That's awesome.
Covered wagon.
There's a yoga system called the 5 Tibetan Rites of Rejuvenation. I recommend it to literally everyone. And the first move of 5, it takes like 10 minutes. It's pretty exertive. So even like people that are not really yogis can get into it. And the first movement is spinning in a circle, essentially. And most people find it useless. But it really is supposed to work out the inner ear. So look into the 5 Tibetans because it's really helpful for the inner ear problems. Not that yours might be distinct, but
yeah, I'm curious. I'm open to anything.
I have a question real quick here. The steers back, Joey, back to Egypt stuff, away from ear, nose, and throat stuff. Although this all sounds like great advice. I obviously have a lot of sinus issues myself. I'm dealing with some of that right now. But when you're mentioning all this Egyptology stuff and the the Western culture understanding of ancient Egypt and stuff, and how that's that narrative has been controlled by a small group of folks, and folks like Zahi Hawass, who kind of I think floats back between the the locals and the British kind of westernized sides of that argument. He's a fence setter of sorts, it seems. But it seems like a lot of the Egyptology stuff came back to Napoleon, right? Around circa 1800, and they've kind of just been controlling that, at least the Western side of that story ever since then.
Yeah. The reason I love Napoleon in particular was because he was the first person to tell his boys to be like, guys, stop speculating about what the pyramids were. None of us in our time are going to understand it, and it's going to depend on future generations to be able to decode it, because we will. He got it. He knew. He was like, there's something we are missing or don't have yet, or didn't have, or they had that we don't. He's like, but knock it off, because we're wasting our time. We're spinning our wheels.
Sure. And
if this thing had a utility, whether electromagnetic or otherwise, or literally electric, whatever, anything that would involve some kind of machine, he nailed it, because none of his guys would have ever been able to cross that barrier into that speculation, whatever. So it would have been thought of as magic for, centuries, and so there's this, whenever Egyptology got a hold of this speculation in the first place, we have to remember it became a career. And once it's a career, there is a grip that is fixed into this thing that no one involved is going to let go of. Especially if letting go of that grip not only hurts your own wallet, but hurts the wallet of people who, say, create energy also, that might be in competition with that.
For sure. There's obviously some very monetarily backed utilitarian, purposes for doing these silly censorship things. But, Napoleon, one thing that interests me about Napoleon, that is some great points you make there. He's an interesting character. He's often described as, just losing at Waterloo and whatnot, but he's got a lot of, interesting character. And he's part of the secret society that actually started America, the Society of the Cincinnati. They had a French chapter, and he was part of it. And he, I think it's interesting that maybe that within that secret society that they hold some secrets within these things relative to ancient Egypt still today. I often wonder that.
That's why the descriptions of Egypt that Napoleon commissioned to artists when he invaded Egypt don't represent anything that is alchemical or esoteric, because that was kept all for themselves.
Sure,
So,
exactly.
but I strongly recommend. I have posted all of it, but I can send the book. Anyone that wants the volumes, there are 5 volumes. So they did a complete drawings, perfect drawings, magnificent drawings of everything that existed, from the fauna to the flora to the temples to the pyramids. They documented everything in magnificent drawings that are as good as photographs, and these were done in 1980s. So it's an amazing work that he commissioned, and no one else, all those people that invaded Egypt before, no one else remembered to document everything that could be seen, and he did it. So many things that we now know how Egypt was in the beginning of the 19th century comes from this La Description de l'Égypte that Napoleon commended.
Yeah.
But I would want to say, just one small thing, that is, why do Egyptologists say that pyramids were tombs? And this is not discussed openly, but the fact is there are documents stating that even something that broke the slab that entered in the pyramid and did that hole that is still used today, I think, to enter there, he actually broken the lid. He documented it, that he broken the lid, took a mummy from there and burned it outside next to the pyramid. So, but that doesn't discredit anything else, because the fact that he was used once as a tomb doesn't mean it was built to be a tomb.
Recycled.
Repurposed.
But that's why they say, because not one single mummy was ever found inside any pyramid in Egypt. Never.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
If I may close out my point there on the Society of Cincinnati, Napoleon's group there, like I was saying, that started America. I get creeped out when I see Donald Trump, who's a member of that same secret society by virtue of being president of the United States, his wife dancing around the Giza Plateau looking like an Indiana Jones character. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh shit! Hey, I want to let you guys know real quick. I'm at 10% on my pad here.
That's good. We're gonna have to wrap it up anyway.
But I want to hear Headless.
I had something to read real quick. So, an Arab historian from the 10th century AD, Abdul Hassan Ali al-Musidi, wrote about ancient Egypt and the methods he alleged were used to move massive stones, including those used to build the pyramids. He claimed that a magic papyrus imprinted with symbols was placed under each stone, after which a metal rod was struck against the stone to initiate the levitation process. According to al-Musadi, the stone would be guided along a fenced path, that could be like electrogravitics, which would be guided along a fenced path with metal poles placed on each side. Some believe these poles could have been used to create high-frequency sound vibrations, which would have been responsible for creating the levitation effects. However, outside this written testimony, there is nothing to corroborate that.
What about trains? Those
Excellent
trains that float.
Maglevs.
Maglevs.
Yeah, but in this case, it's more like you described with the fork tune. So the explanation scientifically is quite simple. If you have a material and you find out how to vibrate it to a specific frequency where it's no longer connected to the laws of physics, it's like that cryogenic lock, quantum lock that they did first with very cold liquid. Did you see any time that? So they have a magnetic road, let's put it. You have a magnetic road in miniature, and you have this disc is placed into a cryogenic liquid, and they take this disc and they put it on top of that magnetic track, and it doesn't move. You can put it in any position that you want, and he's floating. But now they are already doing that without needing the cryogenic. So they are doing it at room temperature already.
With vibration. Yeah,
Yeah.
we know that it actually happened, and we do have proof because emergency services were called in 1898 in New York City when Tesla made an earthquake. So,
Yeah.
I mean, they figured this out. So,
Sure. Absolutely.
That's one of my favorite stories of all time. When Tesla is smiling, you never see this dude smiling, and he's talking to the reporter, and he's like, "We told him it must have been an earthquake. That's all we ever told him." And he's grinning. He's damn near knocked down a building. Talk about fuck around and find out, man. He was the king.
All right. Unfortunately, Joey, I do have another guest before your thing dies, and the next guest tells me to go fuck myself because I'm late.
Well, you are a man of great dude. I don't know how you do it.
Yes. But I really appreciate it. I appreciate everybody jumping on. That was really awesome talk. I didn't want to have to cut it to an end, right, like the way I am, but unfortunately there is somebody else waiting. Yeah, Joey, please, real quick, let everybody else know where they can find your amazing works.
I am on Library of the Untold on YouTube. That's primarily it. I mean, I've got stuff on all the other platforms too, but that's because I have to keep up. But everything, including music, full-length episodes, scripts, just some people like the episodes with no music and no visuals, just so they can listen to it. Those are available all on the website, libraryoftheuntold.com. Basically, all my shit is under Library of the Untold, just keeping it consolidated.
What's your at X?
What's up?
What's your at X?
I'm not sure what at X.
Are you on Twitter? You're not, are you?
Library of Untold.
Yeah,
I just followed you about an hour ago. So Library of Untold.
I didn't even think he was on there.
No, I mean, okay, so I have a parking space on all these platforms.
No, Ricardo.
But yeah,
okay, thank you.
Maybe I should start using that. I don't know. I'll try. I'm gonna start hitting it up. I need to hit all these platforms. I can't keep. By the time I hit them all, there's a new one that comes out.
Oh yeah. But yeah, I'll leave your links in the bottom. Thank you very much, man. And again, people, if this is the first time you've seen him, he's been on the Occult Rejects before. Just recently, something dropped with Coral Castle. Go check that out, and definitely go check out all his other amazing work. I really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for asking us to have you come on. And
thank you for having me.
Hell yeah. It's always a blast. And thank you all in the chat. That's what's up. There was a hell of a lot of people in there, all from all channels. That's what's up. Thank you. I tried to throw as many up on the screen that I could. I appreciate you all. And until the next one, everybody be well.